Hey, what's up? This is the Fit Mess Podcast. My name is Jeremy. We talk about depression, anxiety, mental health stuff. Whatever your struggle is, we probably have it too. But we've worked on a few things over the years to get better, and we like to share them here. One of the things that I've worked on over the years is going to therapy. And if there's one thing I know about you, and I know I don't know you well, but you fucking need therapy. Because I need therapy. Because everybody needs therapy. I don't think I've ever met somebody who couldn't benefit from a little therapy. For me, it was just one of many building blocks on the way to living a happier, healthier life that I have. My journey started on a bike with making some physical changes to try to recover from an injury. And that led to some mental changes because I started to see the world a little bit differently the more I took care of myself. And I wanted a clearer picture. So I reached out for help. And I know what you're thinking. You don't need some stranger telling you things about yourself. Like, that's what you have friends for. That's what you have family for. I call bullshit. All of those people have an agenda. They all know you. They all believe the same stories about yourself that you believe that have gotten you into this mess to begin with. So today, we are going to talk about why you, especially you men, should reach out and see a therapist. It's something particularly challenging for men to reach out and ask for help from anybody. But to have somebody, really look under the hood and examine our thoughts and the things we tell ourselves and our feelings that we don't process or show anybody, it's incredibly beneficial. And we'll get into all of the reasons why with my guest. His name is Mark Azule. He is the founder of Men's Therapy Online. You can find out more about that through the show description at our website, thefitmess.com. But that's pretty much where our conversation picks up, is trying to understand why you, men, won't reach out for help, especially from a therapist. What if your mornings didn't start with an annoying jolt, but with a calm focus and energy? If improving your sleep routine is a top priority for 2025, meet the Lofty Clock, a bedside essential engineered by sleep experts to transform both your bedtime and your mornings. Here's why I find the Lofty Clock to be a game changer. It mimics your body's natural rhythm. It helps you wind down at night and wakes you up gently with a 2-phase alarm. First, a soft wake-up sound to ease you into consciousness, followed by a more energizing get-up sound to help you start the day. Lofty's not just an alarm clock. It's your all-in-one bedside sound machine. It offers over 100 options, including white noise, nature sounds, meditations, and even bedtime stories to help you relax and unwind. So get that phone out of your bedroom. Let's face it, grabbing your phone to set an alarm or listen to an audiobook often leads to an hour or more of mindless scrolling. Join over 100,000 blissful sleepers who have upgraded their rest and mornings with Lofty. Go to buylofty.com and use the code FITMESS20 for 20% off orders over $100. That's BYLOFTIE.com with the promo code FITMESS20.
So I want to just kind of get, a lay of the land. Like, what are some of the common barriers you see that guys are facing getting the mental health that they need? Because we're in so many positions of power, and yet when it comes to mental health, we are lagging far behind.
Far behind, right? I mean, I don't get into too many of the stats, but I can just rattle some off. It's like men commit suicide 3 times more than women. Right, like 1 in 4 men say that they are deeply alone in the fact that nobody would help them in the event of an emergency. We are really struggling with mental health. And there's a loneliness epidemic that the Surgeon General published about a couple of years ago, targeted specifically at men and how we don't connect, right? And we are at risk for things like substance use, suicide, domestic violence, things like that. So, yeah, the main issue, and this is a shame with men, if I can get one thing across to the guys listening, is like, come in proactively. Because what brings guys to therapy is usually a crisis. Number one that brings them to me is divorce. A guy kind of like losing his family, losing his kids, maybe losing their job. Number 2 would be like a big addiction incident, like a binge or a relapse. But I think for a lot of men, it takes that like really strong, like smack in the face before we even start to think about prioritizing our mental health. And it's hard at that point.
Do we suffer from thinking we can fix everything? And it just gets to a point where we realize, okay, it's too far. This load is too heavy. I can't do it. Is that the reason?
I think that's a big part of it. I think, again, a lot of men feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders and that they are, competing with other guys everywhere. So asking for help is like weak, makes you a pussy, right? And
right.
I think also and there is value to this, but I think a lot of men do anything else before talking to a therapist, right? They'll try a new diet, they'll try new exercise, they'll start getting massages, they'll, take a new supplement. And I'm all for physical health. But I think guys will do all of that for years before even considering talking to a therapist or a coach.
I've talked to a lot of guys that say things like, I don't need some stranger to figure out what's going on. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think a stranger is sometimes the best mirror to be held up to show, this is what I hear when you say these things, rather than your mom or your best friend who knows you and all of the stories that you also believe about yourself and can feed into that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, one, we're trained, right? So like any therapist is going to have a master's degree minimum. Many of us have PhDs, and we don't have an agenda, right? Like your parents, your friends, your partner, right? They have an agenda. They want the conversation to go a certain way. They want, an outcome that benefits them, even if they're not conscious of that. But with a stranger, it's like, I don't have an investment. I'm on your side. My investment is helping you be more stable and be happier.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk about one of the key issues you mentioned already, loneliness, mostly just selfishly. This is something that I struggle with. I always say recently, it's been almost 4 years now. I moved to a new town and a new country where I knew nobody and, started working from home. So a lot of those automatic, work friends, not really a thing. The after work dinner thing, the party at Bob's house from accounting or whatever, those things don't happen, right? So loneliness is definitely something that I know I struggle from right now. Making friends as an adult, very challenging. So where does someone start to unpack and deal with loneliness, particularly as an adult?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to think about is, what do you want out of other male relationships? A lot of guys don't even take the time to do that, right? Yeah. And for a lot of us, it's actually not conversation. If you think of like women, they just love chatting. They love, being in touch. They love texting each other all the time. For most masculine dudes, we don't really want that. What we want is companions and camaraderie. Mm-hmm. So I think like finding a common goal and a common community is critical. So I know you talk about fitness a lot. I moved to a small mountain town and I joined a CrossFit gym, and I made a ton of friends that way, right? Because we're kind of, one, we're forced to be together because we work out, every day.
Right.
And two, there's like a common goal there. I think getting involved in volunteer work, nonprofit work can be really great if you work from home or you're a solo entrepreneur. Yeah. There's a great app that we have in my area called Nextdoor, where some people talk a lot of shit on that, but also a lot of people ask for help in the mountains. Right. So like me and my wife, we try a couple times a month to just like go and offer help. We scroll down that and people are like, hey, I need help with my driveway, or I need food, or I need childcare, or like, and we'll just do some of those things just to get into the community a little bit more.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really tapping into, if you have any, your interests and trying to find other people that are already participating in them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like take classes, go to courses, go to conferences even, right? See speakers, like just go where other people that are interested in what you are, are around, and just make them that way. Because I think men, we bond through a third activity. We don't do a lot of back and forth talking. We like being, on the same team working towards a common goal.
Yeah. You mentioned a term that I think is loaded for some people, but masculinity. Like, what does that even mean anymore from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that could be the whole show, man. I think, could be. Right? I will say masculinity, I think, is in a crisis right now. I think there's a lot of really polarized opinions come from all sides of the political spectrum about what masculinity is. But I think when I look at most guys on the ground, a lot of us are just confused. We're told to like kind of do what's called toxic masculinity, which I don't believe in toxic masculinity, but maybe we'll call it traditional masculinity, which is like, be stoic, don't be a pussy, don't show your emotions, just be like kind of like a hard rock. And then kind of this new wave masculinity, which is like, be sensitive, cry, like be open with your emotions, like let people in. And guys hate being that too, right? So I think like both of those kind of suck. The way that we define it is somewhere in the middle, and really we anchor it around an honor code, right? So if you look at kind of traditional masculine entities like the armed forces or the Knights of the Round Table or samurai, right, there was always this honor code. And the code that we use at Men's Therapy Online is strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And I can go through those in detail if you're interested. Yeah. Sure. So strength, I'll run through them really quick. Strength is both physical strength, I think is important. I think guys feel masculine when they are physically strong, whether that be, being a strength athlete, an endurance athlete, a yoga, whatever, right? But also emotional strength, right? The idea that you can hold heavy emotions, or spiritual strength, right? That you can go through really difficult things and keep a spiritual core. I use the example of the idea of being at a funeral, right? And like being able to give a eulogy that's powerful is an example of emotional strength. Not being shut down in the corner, not being overwhelmed by the feelings that are going on there. So building strength, I think, is very masculine. The next one is courage, right? Pretty self-explanatory. But courage basically is like doing shit that you're afraid of, right? And again, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of that. There's a great Jocko Willink quote where he talks about Navy SEALs, and he says it's not that Navy SEALs are not afraid, it's that they're able to operate while they are afraid. And I think that's the masculine core, right? And again, you look at a guy who's courageous and we're like, that's a man, right? Yeah. Next one is mastery. See my cat crawling around in the background. The next one is mastery, which is the idea of like getting good at something. And if you notice how I'm talking about these, they're kind of like abstract themes. It's not about what you're good at. I think traditional masculinity, it's like you got to be good at like sports or home improvement or weightlifting, where it's like, look, if you're a really masterful baker or even a masterful like crocheter and you're like an artisan, I think that's still masculine, right? The idea of just becoming a master at something, learning, growing, being very technically proficient, just being really good at whatever it is that you want to be good at. Even if it's a traditionally feminine activity, I think pursuing mastery is the masculine part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last one is honor. And that's the one I feel like is lacking a lot in our country, unfortunately. But it's the idea of being ethical, right? Doing the right thing, being a servant leader, treating people right, being honest, having a real honor code, and the idea of wanting, kind of the golden rule, right? Treating people how you want to be treated. Having that moral core that I think, again, is really lacking. And I think a lot of men, when they are acting from a place of honor, they feel really good about themselves, right? They feel like they're the superhero of the story.
For sure. Developing a framework like this takes years and typically some sort of an experience that sent you down this path. So I know you had some issues with the rough childhood, some addiction issues. Tell me a little bit about what got you down this path and into helping others.
Yeah, for sure. There's a bunch of story there, but I'll focus it on the addiction because a lot of guys struggle with that. And the cause of my addiction wasn't that I just wanted to get high, right? It wasn't seeking fun. It was kind of like a slow suicide. I was really lost in college. I didn't know what it meant to be an adult, let alone a man. I felt like I was really floundering. So I pursued mastery in the forms of getting really good doing drugs. I was selling drugs.
It's easy to get good at that, by the way.
It's easy. It turns out, right? It's a pretty low barrier to entry. So, I was a party guy, right? I was selling drugs, so I felt kind of like popular because I like had the hookup or whatever, But really, it was because I wasn't confident in myself. And I was trying to do what I thought, as a college kid, what being a man was. But I was compromising my honor. I was compromising my courage because really I was a coward underneath all that, if I'm being honest with myself. I wasn't building strength because I was using things like drugs to short circuit, certain things like talking to women, for instance, right? Or being confident in a social situation with, if I wasn't intoxicated, I was just kind of like a weird loser. I needed those things to kind of like pump me up. So I used it to short circuit a lot of stuff. And it wasn't until I got sober, as well as doing a lot of therapy work, I realized, this work is a lot deeper. It's a lot slower than I wanted it to be, and that I really hadn't thought about what it meant to be a man. I really hadn't thought about what it meant to be an adult, what it meant to grow up. So it wasn't until I really started working on those things, intentionally, that I started to be happy, not just feel empty all the time.
It's definitely the harder route. I mean, I know I still struggle with whether or not I ever had an alcoholic tendency. I come from a long line of proud alcoholics. But I don't know that I ever struggled with it in that way. But I definitely used it as a coping mechanism. When the feelings were too much, pour some beer on it, and all of a sudden the problem went away for a few hours. A lifetime of that, when you suddenly realize there's a better way, probably, so I hear, you start exploring it. It's much harder, takes much longer, but it's so much more rewarding because I feel like the demons that you're basically drowning, you start to actually remove them from your life more efficiently.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the comparison between eating a bunch of candy, which I think is like the drug and alcohol way, versus like a slow cooked, home cooked meal.
Yeah.
Takes a long time, but it's much more nourishing for you. What I'm curious for you, like what like made you want to change? Was there like a rock bottom moment, or was there something where you're like, oh, this path isn't working? Because I think a lot of guys like stay stuck in that for decades.
And I did. Yeah, I definitely was there for a very long time. It was mine was a weird. Rock bottom is a weird term for it because I was actually already on a path to better. I had a really ridiculous knee injury that I started trying to recover from by riding a bike. So I became a bike commuter, and in the process started realizing like how much better I felt by exercising. And I actually went to my wife at that point because not only was I just physically feeling better, but mentally, like having to be so present in the moment of riding a bike through city streets. I was like, God, how do I bring more of this to my life? And so I remember asking my wife, like, this is feeling great. What should I do? And she's like, I don't know, talk to a therapist. And so I did. And that therapist was very much tended toward Buddhism and taught me about meditation and just being present in the moment and all the analogies and all the great stories. And so it was one of these, like, I had this knee injury and it helped me feel a little better when I started doing one thing, which gave me an idea to try another thing, which gave me an idea to try 3 more things. And all of a sudden it started compiling to where at work, when you'd walk by the tray where there's the junk food that everybody brings in from home that they don't want to eat, that I used to grab a handful of, I couldn't even register it as food anymore. was just like, that doesn't, it might as well have been a bag of rocks. It didn't look like food anymore. And then I, always looking for a way to get out of work. I was like, there's a gym downstairs. So even though I rode to work today, I'm going to go down to the gym for my lunch break and go do that. And so it just like, it snowballed, right? Like once I found the one thing I liked, it made me get more curious. And that's really what I think opened up the door to a lifetime of still ongoing change and trying to grow.
I like that. I like that it's gradual too.
Yeah.
Because, I'm recording this near the new year and a lot of people just try to change everything all at once and it just fails.
Yeah.
Right. So I like that you're it's one layer at a time.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of mastery. It sounds like you mastered a certain layer. And then only at that point, then you're ready to go master the next one and the next one, the next one. And before long, you're in that kind of flywheel of self-improvement.
Yeah. And it's through a lot of help too, right? Like it's reaching out because I think as guys, we feel like I have to have the skills inherent in me to solve all of life's problems. And ain't no way I'm asking anybody for help because that's what some wuss would do. And that's not me. But then once you realize I can literally just ask somebody a question and save 5 years of education on this. Cool. Let's go.
I know. And it's that's what I think the failing of the older generation is that older men is that they presented complete pictures to us, right? Either they were the man that we idolized and they had everything figured out, or they were the complete loser that were I just don't want to be that
anything
guy.
But, right.
Anything but this dude, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't get the work in progress. So I think it's cool that you're telling your story of being a work in progress because I think that's what young men need. Of you know some things, you don't know everything, but we're trending up, and that's kind of it's all important.
And I think that's, not to make this about me because you're the guest here, but that's really what this mission has been about is we didn't see the finished product. We kind of have been running from the mess of, the bad example. And so when you're doing that, you tend to find the guy on top of the hill that's finished the journey. And it's so discouraging because you're like, I don't even know, I can't see the path. How do I even get there? So we, and I think a lot of guys out there are trying to just be the person around the trail, around the corner on the trail saying, hey, come this way. I see a way up. And so, and that's what we need. We just need more help from each other, whether it is that therapist holding up a mirror when you tell them your story and they reflect back to you what they hear and try to help you find that path forward.
Yeah. I like that metaphor. I'm in Colorado, so I love trail.
Oh, nice. Yes.
And hiking metaphors. And I just want to underline that, again, for listeners out there of I think a lot of men feel like they're competing with all other men, or it's them versus the world. And I think a lot of our media and social media and influencers really do accentuate that. But I love your example because I think there are many men that want to bring you up with them.
Yes.
We're not all fighting each other all the time.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a big part of my story was coming off that kind of war mentality and just kind of an entitlement version to it as well. Of oh, it's just me and I got to fight, I got to make it all work. And being no, I can ask for help. And not only can I ask for help, it's that's how I make friends. That's how I connect with other people, specifically men, is by learning from them. But I think as a young man, I thought that asking for help means I would be submissive to them, right? They would be dominating me, or they would be better than me or smarter than me, or they would shame me in some way. And there are certainly men that do that, but not all of us.
When you went down this path and started taking better care of yourself, to circle back to what we talked about at the beginning with loneliness, did you find it to be a lonely journey?
It was. I think in the beginning it was when I made loneliness. I think one of the great things that the recovery community does, I was in AA for about 5 years, is I kind of healed in a group. I healed with a group of people, and I'm now in men's groups that I do long term and I also run. So being in community has always been a big part of my journey. And just feeling not so alone and also not so weird. It's so nice to hear another guy talk about something and be oh yeah, I know something about that. I've been there.
Yeah.
And not just feel like I'm the most wretched thing on planet Earth. I think a lot of people feel that way. And it's again, that humility piece of we're all beautiful snowflakes of problems, right? I think our problems are unique, the kind of the constellation, but each individual problem has probably already been solved by somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So tell me a little bit more about your program and what people can do to take part in it.
Sure. Yeah. So everything is on menstherapy.online. We're a community-focused program building emotional intelligence with guys. We have kind of 3 things. We have individual counseling, which is exactly what you think it is. We're all male therapists. So I think it's important for guys because as men, we want to talk about some of the more brutal experiences that we have. I'm talking about sexuality. I'm talking about inner violence that we can have, the kind of hunter mentality. Our emotions can be very violent and intense. And I think oftentimes women counselors don't get that part of us. They don't get how savage we actually are inside. And a lot of men hold back. So then therapy is not effective if you're holding back from your therapist, right? So we got that. We got groups. We have general men's groups as well as divorced dad specific men's groups, because that is a big population that ends up contacting us. And the last thing we do is we do retreats. So we do wilderness backpacking retreats in Colorado and traditional men's retreats in Boulder. So we're kind of wraparound services that way.
I want to touch on what you mentioned there about one of the ways that the therapy can fail men. Are there other ways that guys, especially if somebody is hesitant, that they're listening to this thinking like, I don't know if this is for me. Let me see what this podcast has to say about it. What other sort of red flags should a guy look for before they head into that therapist's office for the first time?
A couple, right? I mean, the one question, if you're going to ask only one question, ask your therapist if they've done their own therapy and for how long. And if it is surprising.
Like I have therapist friends and my therapist, when they say when I talk to my therapist, like the first time I heard that from a therapist, it blew my mind. I was like, no, you're supposed to have this figured out. Why do you have a therapist?
Yeah, well, I say the other way. It's like you want them to be in therapy.
Right. No.
You want them to be experiencing it. You want them to know what it's like to be a client. You want them done their own personal work. So I'd say like minimum 5 years. If you ask a therapist how long and they're like, oh, I just started, or that's not for me. That's something I do for you people.
Right, right.
That level of separation is going to create a real entitled therapist, right? The other one, and I think this was more with female therapists, is what I call validation therapy, right? Of like, you come in as a client, you're talking about your pain of the week, and the therapist is just like, oh my God, that's so bad. That's so hard for you. Like, it's so tough. That doesn't work for men because we end up feeling like victims, and we don't want to be a victim. We don't want a pity party. You know?
What about the other side of that? Of you and most people, it's common what you're going through. Is there value in that?
Yeah, I think that helps a little bit, right? I mean, it's an art form. So in my work, you want to validate a little bit, but men also want solutions, right? Yes. They want like, okay, you like told me what's wrong. I understand it. I grok it. I get that from my childhood. Now what? Right. So, longer term therapy, what we do is we're doing kind of like mission based therapy of like, hey, this is your objective. Go out, have that conversation with your spouse, come back, report to me, and we're just going to keep strategizing. So it turns more into coaching.
Very interesting.
Because again, men want to feel like heroes, not like victims,
Yeah. And for a lot of us, the example growing up was the victim. And so we either mirror it or try to desperately run the other way.
Right. There's a great AA saying, which is 180 degrees of sick is still sick. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I have that in my own life, like trying to just like be anti stuff.
Yeah.
It's still fucked up in its own way.
And it's hard because when you're running from something, you don't know what you're running to. Like often it's just the fear. You're just in that flight mode your whole life. Great stuff. Anything important here that we did not touch on that you want to make sure we mention to folks?
I think we covered. I think it was a great survey. Again, check out menstherapy.online. There's a lot of good stuff there, a lot of podcasts, blogs, all kinds of free stuff to give away. So yeah, if you're on the fence, reach out and talk,
In general, that's a good rule. If you're not sure, just give it a shot. Why not?
Just give it a shot. You can always back out, right?
That's right. Cool. Mark, thanks so much for your time. We'll make sure those links are in the show description here for this episode. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right. My thanks to Mark Azule from Men's Therapy Online for being on the show today. Stick around a minute. Hey, thanks for hanging out. That's going to do it for this week. We really appreciate you listening. If you got any value out of this, if you know that guy who won't reach out and get that help that needs that therapy, and you think this conversation might help sway them in the right direction, please share this episode with them. You can find links to do that at thefitmess.com. You can also find links to save yourself some money on the Lofty Alarm Clock. Our thanks to them for sponsoring us. But that's it for now. We'll see you next week at thefitmess.com.
We know this podcast is amazing and it doesn't seem to lack anything, but we need a legal disclaimer. Prior to implementing anything discussed in this podcast, it is your responsibility to conduct your own research and consult your physician. You should assume that Jeremy and Zach don't know what they're talking about, and they're not liable for any physical or emotional issues that occur directly or indirectly from listening to this podcast.